My brother called me a loser in front of my entire family the same week I picked up a second job to keep him in college. My name is Natalie. I'm 29. And while most people my age are trying to build a life, I was busy funding someone else's. By day, I dragged myself through long shifts at the hospital. And on my so-called days off, I drove strangers around the city just so my brother could sit in lecture halls 3 states away and pretend his life was headed somewhere better than mine. Tuition, rent, books, deposits, random emergencies that somehow always involved bars or concerts. It all came out of my account. My parents called it family sticking together. I was starting to feel more like a credit card with a pulse. That night at family dinner, I was running on 3 hours of sleep and cheap coffee when the conversation turned, like it always did, to my brother's future. Everyone bragged about his big plans, his big school, his big potential, while I quietly did the math in my head and wondered how many more double shifts it would take to pay for his next semester. Then he laughed, looked right at me, and said, "I mean, not everyone can be successful. Somebody has to be the loser who works 2 jobs so I can actually make something of myself." My parents didn't scold him. They laughed. One of them even joked that I was basically the family ATM. I felt something in my chest go very still. I put my fork down, smiled in a way that scared even me, and realized I was done being their backup plan. I walked out of that house without raising my voice, without making a scene, and for the first time, I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, the same brother who mocked me as a loser was standing at my door, on the edge of being evicted, begging me to save him. If you were in my shoes, after everything I'd sacrificed, what would you have said? It didn't start with him calling me a loser. It started a year earlier when my brother, Liam, got into a private college in Los Angeles and my parents sat me down at the kitchen table like they were about to deliver some great honor. They talked about opportunity, about how Liam was the one who could really go far, and how the restaurant had been slow, the medical bills were piling up, and they just couldn't cover everything on their own. Then they looked at me, the daughter with the steady paycheck, and said the line I'd heard my whole life. "Family sticks together, Nat." At first it sounded temporary. I agreed to help with his tuition gap. A little bit for books, just until we figured things out. I told myself it was no big deal. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital, stayed late when they asked, told my body it didn't really need sleep as much as it thought it did. Then tuition turned into tuition plus rent, because living on campus was, as Liam put it, part of the experience. Rent turned into utilities, groceries, and just a little money to de-stress on weekends. Nat, everyone does it. Meanwhile, my life shrank. I stopped going out with coworkers. I stopped buying coffee that didn't come from the break room pot. I pressed accept ride on my rideshare app after 12-hour shifts, telling myself every tip was another fraction of his textbooks, another piece of his future. Liam's future looked pretty good from my phone screen. While I was sitting in my parked car at 2 a.m, eating a gas station sandwich between rides, I'd see his Instagram stories. Rooftop parties in downtown LA, shots lined up on some trendy bar counter, selfies with friends in expensive jerseys at games I couldn't even afford to watch on TV. He'd post captions like, "Grind now, shine later," while holding a drink that probably cost more than my weekly lunch budget. When I asked about it, he laughed it off. "Relax, Nat. This is networking. You want me to be some invisible nerd who just studies and goes home? That's not how business works." When I pushed harder, he turned it back on me. "You just don't get it. You're stuck in your little routine. I'm trying to build something bigger." My parents took his side every time. If I mentioned my savings disappearing, they reminded me I had a stable job and said things like, "You're strong, mija. You can handle it. Liam just needs a head start." It was never, "We're asking too much." It was always, "You're making a big deal out of nothing." The more I paid, the less he called just to talk. Our conversations became transactions. His texts weren't, "How are you?" They were, "Rent's due tomorrow. Need money for this class trip." Or, "Can you send a little extra? Prices here are insane." Somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a sister and started feeling like an app on his home screen, the one he only tapped when his balance ran low. The worst part was how normal it began to feel. I'd open my banking app and see the number sliding down, see my dream of a tiny condo gradually pushed further away, and my first thought wasn't even anger. It was calculation. How many more overnight shifts could I take? How many more weekends could I drive before my body gave up? Liam's life kept getting bigger while mine kept getting smaller, and everyone acted like that was the natural order of things. I remember sitting in my car outside the hospital one night, scrolling past his video of some LA club with confetti falling from the ceiling and thinking, when did my entire life become about paying for his? And if I stopped tomorrow, who would I even be to him? The turning point came wrapped in good news. At least, that's how Liam sold it. He called me one afternoon while I was on my 30-minute break, sitting on a plastic chair in the hospital hallway, eating a protein bar because I didn't have time for real food. His voice was bright, excited, the way it hadn't been since he first got his acceptance letter. "Nat, you're not going to believe this. I got an offer for a summer internship in San Francisco. Real marketing work, big name company, this is huge." For a second, I forgot to be tired. I was genuinely happy for him. I pictured my little brother walking into some shiny office building in a city by the bay, shaking hands in conference rooms, actually doing the kind of thing we'd all dreamed about when we talked about a better life. Then he kept talking. "Housing is crazy expensive up there, but it's only for a few months. And flights are like ridiculous right now. But it's worth it. I mean, you'll cover it, right? Just like you did with LA. This is the kind of thing that sets me up for real money later." He said it so casually, like he was asking if I could grab milk on my way home. I felt my stomach drop. I opened my banking app under the table and stared at the pathetic number that was supposed to be my safety net, my condo fund, my in case life goes wrong money. I thought about the brakes on my car squealing a little louder every week, about the student loan payment I'd skipped just this once to cover his rent, about how I'd been telling myself things would calm down after this semester for over a year. "Liam," I said slowly, "do you have any savings at all? Could you work part-time this semester? Apply for a stipend or something?" He laughed like I'd told a joke. "I barely have time to breathe, Nat. My schedule's insane, and working some dead-end job would kill my GPA. That's your thing, not mine. You know this is an investment. You always say you want me to have better options, right? Well, this is how it happens." The word investment made my jaw clench. Investments pay off. What I was doing felt more like throwing $100 bills into a bonfire and calling it support. That night, I mentioned the internship to one of my coworkers while we were restocking supplies. She raised an eyebrow. "Wait, so you're paying for his school, his rent, his lifestyle, and now he wants you to bankroll a summer in San Francisco?" I shrugged, suddenly hearing it the way she did. "My parents can't really help. The restaurant's barely hanging on. They keep saying this is temporary, that once he graduates, it'll all make sense." She didn't sugarcoat it. "Nat, that kid isn't planning a future. He's planning how to spend your present. There's a difference." A few days later, my parents called. They didn't even say hello properly before launching in. They'd talked to Liam. They'd heard all about the internship. When I hesitated, Mom's tone shifted into that familiar, guilt-soaked softness. "Mija, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. You're stable. You have a good job. You don't want your brother to miss out just because of money, do you? My dad chimed in about sacrifice, about how families from our background had to work twice as hard to get half as far, about how Liam could change everything for us if we just get him through these years. There it was again. We really meant you. My name on the bills, my back doing the heavy lifting. When I tried to explain that my savings were gone, that I was tired, that I couldn't keep going like this, they brushed it off. You're strong. You've always been strong. Liam's not built like you. He needs help. Just a little more. A little more. It was never little. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed in my tiny apartment, surrounded by walls that weren't mine and furniture I'd bought secondhand, and realized I was standing at a line I hadn't drawn, but was suddenly very aware of. I could say yes again and disappear further into the background of my own life, or I could say no and become the villain in everyone else's story. A week later, my mom texted me, "We're doing dinner this Sunday. Come over. We should all talk about Liam's internship together." I stared at the screen, feeling something cold settle in my chest. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner was where everything would finally snap. Sunday dinner smelled like home and felt like an ambush. The second I walked into my parents' house, I could feel it in the way everyone went quiet for a beat and then overcompensated with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Liam was already at the table, leaning back in his chair like he owned the room, talking animatedly about San Francisco, about offices with city views and real players in the industry. My mom fussed over me, loading my plate even though I'd said I wasn't that hungry. My dad poured himself a drink and pretended this was just another family meal, but the second we all sat down, the conversation slid exactly where I knew it would. "So," my dad said, looking at me over his glass, "your brother has some incredible news." Liam didn't need more prompting. He launched into his speech about the internship, the brand name company, the networking, the mentors, the doors this could open. I let him talk. I watched his hands move, watched my parents' faces glow with pride, and tried not to think about the sleep I'd lost and the shifts I'd traded so he could sit at this very table with that much confidence. Then he dropped the last part as casually as a side note. "Housing is crazy, obviously," he said, spearing a piece of chicken. "But Nat's gonna cover that. And the flight. It's just a few months. Totally worth it." He said it as if I wasn't sitting right there, as if my presence at the table was more of a technicality than a factor in the plan. I put my fork down slowly. "Liam," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I told you I'm already stretched thin. I can't just magically come up with thousands more. Have you looked into working part-time? Scholarships? A stipend from the company?" He stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "Come on, Nat. Do you really want me wasting time slinging coffee or flipping burgers? That's not what I'm going to school for. That's your world. I can't risk my GPA and my connections just to pick up some loser job." The word loser hit the table harder than any drop plate could have. My mom hissed his name in warning, but she didn't sound offended for me. She sounded worried he'd messed up the script. My dad cleared his throat. Liam pressed on. "I mean, no offense, okay?" he added, turning toward me with an infuriating little shrug. "You work hard. I get it. But that's not the life I'm trying to build. You're good at grinding. I'm good at, making something bigger. That's the point. Not everyone's meant to be successful. Somebody has to work 2 jobs so the rest of us can actually move up." My parents chuckled, like he'd said something slightly inappropriate but basically true. My dad even shook his head and said, "Liam," in that half-proud, half-teasing tone, then looked at me. "You know your brother's just joking, Mija. Don't be so serious. He's under a lot of pressure." My mom reached over and patted my hand. "You've always been the strong one, Natalie. You have your career. You're stable. Liam is still building. He needs this chance. We all do. I looked at their faces and realized we weren't talking about an internship anymore. We were talking about roles. Mine was set in stone. Reliable, responsible, the one who could handle it. His was eternal potential, never to be weighed down by reality as long as someone else could carry it for him. I swallowed hard. I'm not stable, I said quietly. I'm exhausted. I'm in debt. I haven't saved anything real in over a year. I'm working myself into the ground so he can live a life he openly looks down on me for not having. Liam rolled his eyes. There you go again, making it all about you. This isn't some sob story, Nat. This is a smart move. You help me now, and when I'm making real money, I'll help you. That's how family works. Right? He looked at our parents for backup. They gave it without hesitation. He's right, my dad said. We're a team. We all sacrifice. You think we didn't work ourselves to the bone for you kids? This is just your part now. It's only temporary. My mom nodded, voice softening into that tone that always used to break me down. Please don't be selfish about this, mija. Don't make your brother feel guilty. He's doing something important. Don't pull him down because you're tired. There it was. Not tired, not broke, not being taken advantage of. Selfish. I felt something inside me go from bruised to numb. I looked at Liam, sitting there in his branded hoodie, phone face down on the table like it was a leash he could pick back up at any second. He smirked at me, that same smug tilt to his mouth I'd seen in 100 filtered photos. Come on, Nat, he said, almost playful now. Don't be a loser about this. You know you'll come through. You always do. The room went quiet after that. Even my parents didn't laugh. I heard the clock ticking on the wall, the faint sizzle from the kitchen. I felt every hour I'd spent on my feet, every mile I'd driven, every overtime shift I'd volunteered for so he wouldn't have to think about money. Something in me snapped, but it wasn't loud. It was almost peaceful. I picked up my napkin, laid it neatly on the table, and stood up. My mom's face crumpled in confusion. Where are you going? We're still talking. I pushed my chair in slowly. No, I said, my voice calm in a way that scared even me. You're still talking. I'm done. Liam scoffed. So what? You're gonna throw a tantrum now? I looked at him and felt nothing. No urge to prove myself. No desperate need to be understood. Just a clear, cold line finally drawn. From now on, I said, I pay my bills. You pay yours. I'm not your ATM. I'm not your backup plan. Whatever happens next, that's on you. My dad started to protest. My mom said my name like a plea. Liam muttered something under his breath about me overreacting. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I grabbed my keys from the counter, walked out into the warm night air, and closed the door behind me. For the first time in a long time, the weight on my shoulders shifted. It wasn't gone, but it was no longer growing. I drove back to my tiny apartment in silence, my phone vibrating in the cup holder with texts I didn't read. I fell into bed, still in my scrubs, staring at the ceiling, knowing I had just become the villain in my family's story. What I didn't know yet was how fast their version of the story would fall apart, or that in just 2 weeks, the same brother who called me a loser would be on my doorstep begging me to save him. The texts started before I even made it home. My phone buzzed non-stop in the cup holder as I drove, screen lighting up with my mom's name, my dad's, Liam's. I let it ring. By the time I pulled into my apartment lot, there were 10 missed calls and a flood of messages. I sat in the car with the engine off and finally scrolled. My mom went first. Natalie, you embarrassed us. You made a scene over nothing. Call me. Then another. You know your brother didn't mean it. Don't destroy this opportunity because you're emotional. My dad's messages were shorter, sharper. You walked out on your family. Not okay. We worked hard for you. This is how you repay us? Liam's texts were the most chaotic. The first ones were arrogant, like he still thought this was all theater. Nice performance tonight. You done being dramatic? Then, you're not really going to screw me over because your feelings got hurt, right? When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. Rent is due next week, Nat. Don't play games. Then, seriously, answer me. A few hours later, past midnight, they turned mean. You always act like a victim? You like being the martyr, huh? You think you're better than us because you work yourself to death in some hospital? And finally, you're still going to pay. You always do. You're just throwing a fit. I put the phone face down and let it buzz on the nightstand until the battery died. The next day, after a 12-hour shift that felt like it lasted a century, I turned it back on. There was a new number in my missed calls list with a California area code. My voicemail alert popped up. A polite voice introduced herself as the building manager for Liam's apartment in LA, explaining that his rent had been late more than once, and she'd been told I was the primary payer. She wanted to discuss a plan before they had to take further action. My chest tightened, but this time not from panic, from anger. I called her back on my break, standing in a corner of the hospital hallway. Hi, yes, this is Natalie. I got your voicemail. I'm not the tenant. I'm not on the lease. I've been helping him, but I won't be doing that anymore. She hesitated, surprised. So you won't be covering the past due balance? No, I said, and I felt the words settle in my bones. I won't. You'll need to speak directly with him or whoever is actually on the lease. I can't keep paying for his responsibilities. She sighed, the way people do when they've seen this pattern 100 times. Understood. Thank you for letting me know. Hanging up, I expected guilt to wash over me. Instead, there was this strange, thin slice of relief. For once, the problem was not automatically mine to solve. That night, Liam's texts changed again. Why did you tell my landlord that? Now she's on my case. You're really going to ruin my life over one comment at dinner? You're supposed to be my sister, not my enemy. Then came the social media show. A coworker sent me a screenshot on TikTok with a simple caption. This your brother? In the video, Liam sat on someone's couch, hood up, doing his best sad face. A melancholy song played in the background. Text overlay read, "When your own family turns their back on you while you're trying to better yourself." The comments were mostly from people who didn't know him. That's messed up. Family can be the worst. One girl wrote, "My mom did this to me. Stay strong." But the likes were low. The views nothing special. It wasn't the viral sympathy moment he was clearly fishing for. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt tired in a different way, like I was watching a bad play I'd already walked out of. He didn't tag me, but the message was clear. I was the villain in his story now, the selfish sister who abandoned him. My parents joined the chorus, of course. We saw what Liam posted. My mom texted, "Why are you making your brother feel alone?" My dad added, "He's under a lot of stress. You're older. Act like it." I muted the group thread. For the first time in years, the noise of their emergencies faded into the background. I picked up extra shifts again, but this time, the math in my head was different. Every overtime hour, every late-night drive in my car was for me. For the cracked tiles I wanted to replace in a future kitchen. For the down payment on 4 walls that would actually belong to me. I opened a new savings account and renamed it Condo, just to remind myself why I was doing this. The number inside was embarrassingly small, but it was mine. No one else had a claim on it. Days passed, then a week. Then almost 2. The messages from Liam slowed from constant to occasional to desperate. They gave me a notice. If I don't pay, they say they'll start the eviction process. I need your help, Nat. You can't seriously let this happen. I read them all and didn't answer. I kept going to work. I paid my own bills. I slept better than I had in months. Part of me thought he'd figure it out, that he'd get a job or talk to the school or go stay with friends until the storm passed. Part of me honestly believed, maybe for the first time, that his problems were not my responsibility. And then, exactly 2 weeks after that dinner, I came home from a brutal shift, juggling my bag and my keys, turned the corner to my apartment door, and saw him sitting on the floor outside it, duffel bag at his feet, eyes swollen and wild like a kid who'd just realized the monster in his story wasn't imaginary. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion. Liam looked nothing like the version of himself I'd been funding all this time. His hair was messy, hoodie stained, eyes red like he hadn't slept. The duffel bag slumped next to him said more than any text he'd sent in the past 2 weeks. He scrambled to his feet when he saw me. "Nat," he said, voice cracking. "Finally, I've been out here for an hour." I slid my key into the lock without answering. "You could have texted?" "You stopped answering?" He shot back, a hint of the old attitude flashing through the panic. Then it crumbled. "Please, can we talk?" I pushed the door open and stepped inside. For a moment, I considered shutting it in his face. Instead, I stepped aside. "You have 5 minutes." He dragged his bag in like it weighed 100 pounds and dropped it by the couch. He didn't sit. He just stood there, twisting his hands together. "They're actually doing it," he blurted. "The eviction. The notices weren't just threats. I'm out, Nat. I had to leave today." I hung my keys on the hook, kicked off my shoes, moved on autopilot while my brain tried to wrap itself around the idea of my brother being physically kicked out of his perfect LA life. "How far behind are you?" I asked. He swallowed. "A couple months. Maybe 3. I thought I could catch up once you cooled off and started helping again." There it was. Not a plan. Just the assumption I would cave eventually. I leaned against the counter. "So what do you want from me?" He stared at me like the answer was obvious. "I need you to help me. I need the money, Nat. Just enough to get current. Or at least enough so they'll stop the process. If I lose that apartment, I lose everything. I can't stay with anyone. My roommates are pissed. My friends are broke. My credit's screwed. The internship in San Francisco, they expect me to be stable. They can't find out about this." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because even now, with his whole life falling apart, he was still more worried about how it looked than what it was. "You're not going to San Francisco," I said quietly. "Nat, don't say that," he snapped, panic edging into anger. "This is my shot. I just need help through this part. You always said you wanted me to have chances you didn't get. Well, this is it. Don't ruin it because you're mad." I took a deep breath. "Liam, I'm not ruining anything. You did that all by yourself when you decided your rent and bills and consequences were optional as long as I existed." His voice went small. "I messed up, okay? I know I messed up. I was stupid. I thought it would work out, like it always did. I thought you'd come through, because you always do. I'm sorry." "I am. But I'm going to be homeless, Nat. Do you understand that? I'll be on the street." That word hit hard. Homeless. The part of me that had changed his diapers, that had walked him to school, that had stayed up late helping with homework, recoiled at the idea of him sleeping on a sidewalk. He saw it and pounced. "Please," he said, stepping closer. "Please, Nat, I'll do better. I'll get a job. I'll budget. I'll stop going out. Just help me this one last time, and I swear I'll—" "Stop," I said. The word came out sharper than I intended, cutting through his promises like glass. He froze. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just my little brother, but a grown man who had built an entire life on the assumption that I would always break before he did. You called me a loser, I said slowly, in front of our parents, while I was working 2 jobs to keep you comfortable. You laughed about my life like it was a cautionary tale. You let them call me an ATM like it was a joke. You knew what you were doing. He winced. I was being an idiot. I didn't mean it like that. You meant it exactly like that? I said. And you meant it every time you posted another party while asking me for rent. Every time you blew money on networking and then cried about being broke. This, I gestured at his duffel, his red eyes. This isn't an accident. This is the bill coming due. He swallowed hard, tears spilling over now. So that's it? You're just going to watch me get thrown out? You're going to let your brother be homeless? I shook my head. No, I'm not going to let you be homeless. You can go back to Texas. Mom and Dad still have a roof. You can work at the restaurant, pick up whatever job you can find. You can call the school and take a leave if you have to. You have options, Liam. They're just not pretty or convenient. He stared at me like I'd suggested he move to Mars. Go back? Live at home and flip tacos? Are you serious? The disgust in his voice was the last little push I needed. I felt my face go calm in that same scary way it had at dinner. You know what, Liam? I said. That's not a loser problem. He blinked. What? I held his gaze. That's not a loser problem. That's your problem. You chose your lifestyle. You ignored your bills. You treated me like a walking wallet and our parents like a backup plan for your ego. This is what that looks like when the credit runs out. Silence stretched between us. He opened his mouth, shut it, then tried one last time. I'm begging you, he whispered. Please. I felt the sting in my chest, but I didn't move. I'll give you something, I said finally. Hope flashed in his eyes. I'll buy you a bus ticket home. Tonight. You won't be on the street. You'll have a place to sleep, food to eat, people who still somehow think you hanging the moon is worth their last dollar. But I'm done paying for you to pretend you're better than the life you actually earned. The hope died a little, but it didn't disappear. He knew I meant it. For the first time, I think he actually believed my no. He looked around my tiny apartment, at the walls I still didn't own, at the exhaustion on my face, and maybe saw me clearly for the first time too. So that's it, he said, voice flat. That's it, I replied. An hour later, I watched him climb onto a bus headed back to Texas, duffel over his shoulder, shoulders hunched. I stood in the parking lot until the taillights disappeared, my phone heavy in my pocket, my chest weirdly light. I'd just refused to save my brother from the consequences he'd worked so hard to avoid. I knew my parents were going to rage, that I'd be painted as the heartless sister who chose money over family. What I didn't know yet was how completely his return would shatter the story they'd been telling themselves, or how far he'd have to fall before any of them finally admitted who had really been holding everything up. Liam lasted about 3 days at home before the shine wore off for everyone. At first, my parents treated his return like some bittersweet twist in a movie, hugging him tight, feeding him his favorite dishes, telling him it was just a rough patch, and that God had a plan. But rough patches cost money. His credit card bills followed him. So did the calls from his old landlord. The school emailed about his unpaid balance. The internship in San Francisco sent a polite but firm message asking him to confirm his housing situation and availability. He never replied. He didn't have anything to say that wouldn't blow up the image he'd been selling. Within a month, he was working the lunch shift at the restaurant, the job he'd once mocked like it was beneath him. At first, he treated it like a temporary humiliation, dragging his feet, rolling his eyes whenever customers were rude, disappearing into the back to scroll his phone. Then the reality he'd always been shielded from hit. If he didn't show up, things didn't get done. When he was late for the 3rd time in a week, my dad didn't yell. He just handed him the schedule and said quietly, "This is not a favor, Liam. This is work. You want money? You show up. A couple of months later, Liam tried picking up a second job at a fast food place down the road to help chip away at the debt he'd racked up on my parents' cards. It lasted 6 weeks. He got written up for calling out too often, and eventually, they let him go. The kid who had once bragged about never killing himself for some dead-end job was suddenly surrounded by them, and they were the only ones willing to have him. Our parents finally stopped pretending this was just a phase when the bank called about a missed payment on a loan they'd co-signed for him. I could hear the exhaustion in my mom's voice over the phone when she said, "We thought we were helping him. We were really just delaying this. See." There was no lecture, no guilt trip, just a quiet admission I never thought I'd hear. "We put too much on you, mija. We shouldn't have." It didn't erase the years that came before, but it mattered. In the middle of all that, my life didn't magically become easy, but it became mine. I stopped picking up every extra shift just because someone asked and started picking the ones that made sense. I built that little condo account until it was something real. The day I signed the papers on a small place of my own, keys warm in my hand, I thought about every time someone had called me strong as an excuse to pile more weight on my back. Turns out, real strength wasn't carrying everyone else. It was putting some of that weight down and refusing to pick it back up. Liam and I aren't close now. We text on holidays, sometimes a random update. He did eventually go back to school part-time, working while taking classes, the way he swore he'd never do. Every once in a while, a message slips through where he sounds almost like the kid he used to be, before all the entitlement and pretending. He apologized once, in a late-night text that simply said, "I get it now. I'm sorry for how I treated you." I believed him, but I didn't reopen the bank of Natalie. I don't think he expected me to. If there's anything I learned from all of this, it's that love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. You can care about someone and still refuse to be their safety net every time they jump without looking. You can be family and still say, "This is where I stop." For years, I thought being a good daughter and a good sister meant bleeding myself dry so everyone else could feel comfortable. Now I know better. Being good doesn't mean being used. Being kind doesn't mean saying yes. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is finally let the person who keeps calling you a loser find out what it actually feels like to stand on their own 2 feet.